Blue Beetle is the perfect start to the new DCU. With a well-rounded plot and a cast you like from the start, even though the dialogue is straightforward, it still uses it to its advantage. I ended up enjoying Blue Beetle a lot more than I thought I would. It's very focused, centered on the character itself and not necessarily on setting up future Justice League movies or trying to introduce you to a new character. And because this is a character that isn't as mainstream as Batman or Superman, we don't have to see the same origin story play out over again.
Batman's a fascist!
The marketing for this movie is very centered around he's going to be a superhero whether he likes it or not. And that is the premise of the entire movie. The message that's being sent is life sucks sometimes, but you know, we're gonna have to play the hand that we're dealt. And to further complement the message or the theme of the movie is the family. I really like that they stay relevant throughout the whole movie and they're not just used as goofball characters for people to laugh at. There is an emphasis on them sticking together, them being Mexican and poor and having to deal with the worst of issues or being put in the worst of places, but always having one another and making the most out of a terrible situation.
They don't get out much.
The dialogue is very straightforward in this movie, and even though I do appreciate that they don't spend time explaining the plot to us, our characters are always expressing how they feel directly, which can lead to some lines creating big red targets for people on Twitter or characters like Ben Shapiro. However, that's not the point of the movie, and what it lacks in subtlety, it makes up for in story cohesion. Now, I gotta get into spoilers here, so you've been warned. Probably my favorite scene in the movie is whenever Rudy is talking to Jaime and telling him the struggles that him and his father went through to get where they are today. It tells a lot and really sums up the theme of the movie and puts everything together in this one melting pot. It really reminds me of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man when Uncle Ben is telling Peter Parker, with great responsibility comes great power. Now that scene has a bit more subtlety behind it because you can interpret it a lot differently due to the misunderstanding Peter has with his Uncle Ben.
Quit worrying about me, okay? Something's different. I'll figure it out.
Now, with Rudy and Jaime, it's a lot more straightforward. They're talking to each other directly, and even though you lose the interpretation behind it, it is able to capture the consistency of what we're trying to learn from this movie. From the very beginning, they talk about how Jaime just graduated from college, but he isn't able to get a job. They're talking about how they're always being looked down upon from the higher-ups and the corporal executives, and to top it all off, they're about to lose their house due to the father having medical conditions and problems. This doesn't get any better when Jaime receives his superpowers. If anything, things get worse. And it isn't till after their father tragically passes away in such a heartbreaking scene that we see how these people fight to survive, how the grandmother gets them all together and says, use this pain in order to fight for what we can still have. We can cry later. And to me, that is just super beautiful because the end of the movie doesn't fix itself. No one wins the lottery or things don't happen. Sure, Rudy gets a new truck, but they're still gonna lose the house. They still don't really have a place to stay. Jaime has powers, but it didn't solve his issues. What solved their issues was actually sticking together as a family and fighting through the struggle and not just giving up, because it's through taking your issues one step at a time that gets you to those happy moments, those happy place. Earlier I talked about how it's great that these characters are expressing their emotions and not the plot. And there's a key difference between that, because whenever they start doing wacky and crazy stuff, it begins to make sense on why they're acting the way that they do or why they have a skill set that they might have. And we won't have situations like in Fast and Furious where people who were once just mechanics are now able to fly out into space and be these super spies that can hack into any computer anywhere around the world. Not only does this help explain actions, but it adds weight to the situations at hand. When Jaime's father dies, we care about it because we know how they feel towards one another due to how they expressed it to us. Seeing the family lose their emotional rock is heartbreaking, and we understand why Jaime goes to the dark side and starts wanting to kill. This leads to, even though the third act kind of strays away from the struggle message, it transitions into a personal character growth and development, where the sentient Blue Beetle suit at the beginning is a weapon one that is trying to fulfill its purpose, where Jaime is just a guy who doesn't want to kill people. They switch into Jaime turning himself into a weapon and wanting to fulfill his lust for revenge, and the Blue Beetle suit realizing and connecting with Jaime and understanding that everyone has their own struggles and everyone is somewhat relatable through those struggles. And speaking of the Blue Beetle suit, I'm gonna make an awkward segue into how the special effects look. Honestly, they were great. Whenever transitioning between practical and special effects between the suit, it was really seamless. It was awesome to see the suit in action. I do think in the second act, the action scenes looked very similar to something off of CW TV, and that's not much of a compliment, I'm sorry. But in the third act, it makes up for it. DC's always stayed on top when it comes to choreographing their action scenes and having the big bad guy feel menacing and these guys feel powerful, and it looks like anime when they fight. So it's very enjoyable and it really catches up to itself in the third act. But the second act, you're just kind of like, oh boy, things get a little weird with the editing. With an easy to follow plot, dialogue that is direct but adds to the cohesive and telling of the story, and VFX that not only complements but gives you a wild ride of an experience, I gotta give Blue Beetle an 8 out of 10. Until next time, play nice. Being half black and Mexican myself, it was actually kind of fun to watch the family on screen, and too relatable. Seeing how loud they are and how they crack jokes at one another and mess with each other. And does any other Mexican out there have an Uncle Rudy like I do?